myself Dr. Ruchi Gupta. Today I will discuss Servlet. Basically, Servlet, it is a server-side technology that is used to run on the server side. So, as we have already discussed the various technology in detail in the previous lectures, so today we will discuss Servlet in detail. So, first of all, we have to know what is a servlet and why we have to use this servlet in Java. So servlet technology, it is used to create a web application. Basically, when we want to execute when any program is to be executed on the server side, then we need some server side technology. So in that case, we use various terminologies or technologies like servlet, JSP, Java Server Page, or CGI. There are certain technologies are available in which are to be executed on the server side, and the responses came back to the client. So this is one of the technology where basically it is used to create some web application that reside at the server side, and basically it is used to create a dynamic web pages. So if we want to update anything on the server, then it will reflect on the client. So servlet technology, it is very robust, scalable because of Java language, because these servlets are to be written in the Java. Before the servlet, we were used CGI. So CGI is also a server side technology, but it is using it use the C or C++. That's why in nowadays we are not using this CGI technology. Instead of this CGI, we are using now servlet technology, because the servlet is written on the Java language. So before servlet, as I have already told you that before servlet we were used CGI, that is a common gateway interface. It is a scripting language. It was very popular server-side language, but there are certain disadvantages of this technology, as I have mentioned that first of all, it is written in C or C++. And secondly, it is not platform dependent. It is a platform dependent. That's why we are replacing this common gateway interface or CGI with servlet. So, what is the definition of servlet? So, servlets are basically a Java program. So, we have just write a Java program on the server, and these Java programs will only execute on the server side. It will never execute on the client side. So, it is a Java program that run on the Java enabled web server or application server. So, we need a web server to execute the Java programs, which is called servlet. So they are used to handle the request obtained from the web server, process the request, and it will produce the response, and that response is go back to the web server, and then web server will transmit this response to the client. So there are certain properties of the servlet. First one, it only works on the server side. So as I have already mentioned that because servlet is a server-side technology, so servlet programs are only execute on the server side. Now, second is servlets are capable of handling the complex requests that is obtained from the web server. So what is the process of this servlet? First of all, the request is coming from the client in the form of HTTP request. Then this HTTP request will go on to this web server, and then in the web server, which is called a web container, the request is going from the web server to the servlet. Servlet will execute this request, and the responses go back to the web server, and then web server will transit this response to the client. So this is the working of this servlet. I will explain the whole servlet life cycle in detail in the next slides. So servlet is basically, it is a technology that is used to create the web application. So servlet is basically it is an API that provide an interface and classes and documentation. Basically it is an interface between client and server that must be implemented for creating any servlet. Servlet is a class. Servlet is nothing, it's just a class. It's just a program which we have to write on the server side. And its program will execute on the server side only. So it is a class basically that extend the capabilities of the server and respond to the incoming request. So it can respond to any type of request which is coming from the web server. So we can say that it is a web component that is deployed on the server to create the dynamic web pages. This is the process that how we can create the servlet on the server and how we can execute these requests. So this is our client side. So firstly, the request will go from the client to the server. So it is request, and what type of request it is? It will be a HTTP request. It will go on, the request is always transferred in the form of HTTP request. So HTTP request will send to the server. Then in the server, there is a program, servlet. One program is run on the server. So it will execute the request to be executed. It comes from client to the web server. Web server will transfer this request to the servlet. Servlet will execute this request, and the response is generated at the runtime, and this response it will send to the client. The response is sent to the client, and then client will display that response to the user. So this is the whole architecture. As I have already told you that the request is always transferred from client to the server in the form of HTTP only. That is a hypertext transfer protocol request. So once we have to send the HTTP request to the server, this is a web server, or we can say it is a web container. Then one servlet program is executed on the server that is responsible for executing that HTTP request on the server only. Now, if there is a need of data which is reside on the database, so it is also responsible to fetch that or access the data from the database, and then it will execute this request on the server, and then the response will go back to the client in the form of HTTP response. Because the request is coming in the form of HTTP, so responses also will go in the form of HTTP. So this is the whole architecture of servlet, that how the request and response is received or sent back to the client or server. So execution, basically when we have to execute these, the whole process, it involves 6 basic steps. Number 1, the client will send the request to the web server. As I have already discussed in the previous slide, that in the first step, the web browser will send the HTTP request to the web server. Then web server receive this request. In the second step, the web server will receive this HTTP request. Then in the third step, the web server passes this request to the corresponding servlet. Then in the third step, this request will transmit it to the servlet. Then after that, in the fourth step, the servlet process this request and generate the response in the form of output. So in the fourth step, this is the servlet program. It will execute this request which is coming from the web server, and it will produce some output in the form of response. And after producing the output, the next step is the servlet send this response back to the web server. So once the output is to be generated, then servlet will send this response back to the server. After that, in the sixth step, the web server send this corresponding back to the client. So the web server now send back response to the client, and client browser will display it on the client screen. So this is your sixth step, that client response will go back to the client, and then client will display this response on the client screen. So basically this is a 6-step process, that how the request is coming from the web browser to the server. Then next, how the server will transmit that request to the servlet. Then servlet will execute this query or request. It will produce some output, and then it will send the response to the web server. Then web server will send back this response to the client, and finally the client will display this result. This is the whole architecture, or we can say it's a whole working of client server request or servlet request execution. So now it is understandable that what are the advantages of this servlet. As we have understood the process of this architecture of servlet, so we can easily identify that what are the various advantages of this servlet. So there are various advantages of servlets over the CGI. As I have already told that CGI is also a server-side technology, but there are certain advantages of servlets over the CGI. So the web container, it creates a threads to handling the multiple requests to the servlet. Means servlet can handle multiple requests parallelly. This is one of the major advantage of using this servlet instead of using CGI. Because, and how it will manage the number of requests parallelly, because once the number of requests is coming from the client, so it will create a thread. For each request, it will create the thread. So if n number of requests will come from the client, then it will create the n number of threads, and all the threads are executed parallelly. So this is one of the major advantage of using servlet over the CGI, because Java support multi-threading, and we this servlet using the concept of threading, so multiple requests can be executed parallelly with the help of threading. So threads have a lot of benefit over the process, such as they share a common memory area, they are light-weighted, cost of communication between threads are very low. So these are various benefits of using servlets. It will provide us a better performance because it create a thread for each request. Means there is no delay, no memory common. Share the common memory area, so it will produce a better performance. Portability. Why we called it portability? Because it uses a Java language, and Java is a portable. Means it's a independent platform independent. We can run the program anywhere if we are using a JVM. It is a robust Java, so don't worry about memory leakage, garbage collection, etc. because it uses Java, and it is secure, as we have to know the features of Java, because Java is a secure language. So it is a secure. Servlets are also secure. So the server-side extensions are nothing but the technology that are used to create dynamic web pages. So basically these servlets are creating for the used for creating the dynamic web pages. Because if we are using the HTML, so HTML is basically used to create the static web pages. So if we want to create some dynamic web pages, so in that case we will use servlet. So actually, to provide the facility of dynamic web pages, web page need a container or the web server. So if we want to create a dynamic web page, that's why there is a need of some web server or web container. So to meet this requirement, web server provides offer of some solutions in the form of APIs, that is the application programming interface, and these API allow us to build a program to run on the web server. So if we are talking about this Java servlet, so Java servlet is also one component of API, and it will run on the Java platform. That is the in enterprise version of this Java Enterprise Edition. Basically, we are using we have to use a two edition of Java. One is a Java Standard Edition. Second is a Java Enterprise Edition. So all these server side technologies are run on this Java Enterprise Editions, like Java Beans, Servlets, JSP. All these are type of technologies. They are always run on this Java Enterprise Edition. So servlet technology, it is similar to other web extension, such as it is just like a common interface, and common gateway interface, that is CGI script, and a hypertext preprocessor, that is a PHP. So, but there are certain limitations of both these technology. That's why we are using this servlet. So, because CGI is also a server-side technology, and servlet is replacing the CGI, so we have to know that what is a CGI. So, CGI it is a common gateway interface. It is also a server-side technology that is written in a C or C++. Basically, it is written in C or C++, and it is responsible for processing the client request and generate the dynamic content. So in CGI, when a client make a request to access the dynamic web pages, then server perform the following operations, like it first locate the request web page, that is a required URL for that web page. Then it will create a new process to the client request. Then it will invoke the CGI application within the process and pass to the application, and then collect the response from the CGI applications, and finally destroy the process and prepare the HTTP response, and that HTTP response will send back to the client. So this is the whole process of CGI, that how CGI work. This is a common gateway interface request response process. So this is your client. Client will send this HTTP request to the server. This request, then server will send this request to the CGI application. CGI application will execute that request and send that HTTP response to the server, and then server will send back this response to the client. So for each request, a new process will be created in the CGI. So this is the process of CGI. This is the whole process of CGI, that for each request, for each HTTP request, CGI shell will be created. So a CGI technology, it enables the web server to call an external program and pass this HTTP request information to the external program to process the request. And for each request, it will start a new process. There are certain disadvantages of this CGI. Number one, there are many, when number of client increases, so it will take more time to send the response back to the client. It is one of the disadvantage of this CGI, so that we have used now servlet. Now, the second is, for each request, it is start a process, and web server is very limited to start the process. And the third main disadvantage of this CGI, that it is a platform dependent language. It works on platform dependent language. That's why we have to this CGI is to be replaced by servlet. So there is a difference between servlet and CGI. Servlets are portable and efficient in nature, while the CGI is not portable, because servlet is run on the written on the Java language, and CGI it is written on C or C++. So it is a platform dependent, or it is work on non-dependent. So in servlet, data sharing is possible. In CGI, it is not possible. In this, servlets can directly communicate with the web server. but in CGI, they cannot directly communicate with the web server. So, servlets are less expensive in comparison of CGI. It is more expensive in comparison of servlet. Servlets can handle the cookies. It is able to handle the cookies, but CGI is not able to handle the cookies. So there are certain differences between servlets and CGI. Now we come on the life cycle of servlet. As I have already told that how the request is transferred to the server and how the servlet is processed on that request. So there is a process of executing the request which is coming from the web server on the servlet. So there is a certain steps of executing that request on the through the servlet. So this is called life cycle of servlet. So the entire life cycle of servlet is managed by the servlet container. So first of all, the request is coming from the client to the web server, or which is called web container. Then web container will send this request to the servlet. That now server is execute that request. So the execution of that request, it is called this life cycle of servlet. So there are certain 4 stages of this life cycle. So it is managed by the servlet container, which use a java.servlet. We will import the package, that is javax.servlet interface understand to servlet object. And let us find out that how the life cycle of this servlet will work. So there are certain 4 steps of this servlet. Number 1, we have to upload the servlet, then initialize the servlet, then it will handle the request, and once the whole request is to be executed, then the servlet will be destroyed. So these are certain steps. Number 1 is loading and installation. In this, at the time of this loading and installation, one function will be invoked, and that function is called init. So one object is to be created by the web container or web server once the request is to be loaded. So at this time, one function object is to be created by the web container, and then this function will be invoked. After this, so basically the purpose of this init function, it is responsible for handling the request which is come from the first time from the client. And after that, the number of requests will be handled by the another function, that is service. So once this object is to be initialized, then now we are ready for the service. So now number of requests which is coming from the client, it will execute by this service method. Now the next, once the whole requests are to be executed, then the last function, that is a destroy function, is to be executed or invoked. And finally, we have to end this life cycle of servlet. So these are various steps we have discussed in detail. Number 1 is the loading servlet. So the first stage of this servlet life cycle is loading and installation of the servlet by the servlet container. So the web container or servlet container load the servlet of the following 2 stages. So in this step, there are 2 stages. One is loading. First of all, they load the servlet class and then create the object of this servlet. And this object is to be created by the web container or web server. So to create the instance of the servlet, the container use the no argument constructor. So in the first step, we have to load the servlet through the web container. Means we have to initialize the object, create the object. One object is to be created by the web container. So once the servlet is loaded, then we have to initialize the servlet. This is your second step. So after the servlet is initialized successfully, then the servlet container initialize the servlet object. And for initialization of this servlet or invoking the servlet, we have to use this statement servlet.init, servlet config. This method which accepts the servlet config as a parameter and it will invoke this servlet. And this init method is always invoked only once. In the whole process, the init function will invoke only once. So immediately after this servlet config object is initiated successfully, this method is used to initialize the resources. Now, if we want to connect with the database, then we can start the process of JDBC connectivity. Now, if the servlet failed to initialize the container, then it will show unavailable or exception. Now, the third step is handling the request. So after initialization, the server instance is ready to serve the client request. Now, with the help, once your init function is invoked, then once the request is coming from the server, so the service method will invoke. So servlet container, it performs the following operation when the servlet instance is loaded to service request. Number one, it creates a server request and server response object, because number of requests is coming from the server and service method is responsible for executing these requests. So it will create a servlet request and servlet response object. In the case this is servlet request, the web container create this HTTP servlet request, and if it is a response, then it will create a HTTP servlet response object respectively. Now, after creating the request and response object, it will invoke this service method, that is servlet.service, servlet request, servlet response method, by passing the request and response object. This service method, while processing this request, we will use this throw exception. If any error occur, so we will use this throw exception. Now, once all the requests are to be executed through this service method, then finally we will destroy the servlet. So when servlet container decide to destroy the servlet, so it performs the following operations. Number one, it allows all the threads currently running in the server method of the servlet instance to complete their jobs and get released. So once all the requests are to be executed, then the number of threads which are running parallelly, so it will complete their jobs and get released. And after currently running threads have completed the job, then the destroy method will be, one object of destroy method will be invoked. So the servlet container call this destroy method on the servlet instance. So this is the last step of this servlet life cycle. So once your destroy method is executed, so once we have to destroy, once your destroy method is to be executed, the servlet container release all the references of the servlet instance and it will become eligible for the garbage collection. So basically, in this servlet life cycle, we are using three main methods. One is init, that is only one time invoke. Then we have to use service method, which invoke once we have to receive the requested from the web server, and all these requested will be executed through this service method. And once the whole request will be executed, then it will release through this destroy method. So this is the whole the complete life cycle of servlet. Thank you.